Hi everyone, welcome back to Newton Community Farm. This is our YouTube channel and it's Wednesday afternoon, which means that it's time for gardening. My name's Hope, if I haven't met you before, and right now we're sitting in the learning garden. And behind the learning garden is where all the food is grown for Newton Community Farm's distributions. One announcement before we jump into today's show is we're launching a new program, our Healthy Harvest Bags. So every Friday they're available for pickup at Newton Community Farm. They're available for pre-order on our website all week leading up to Friday, and Friday afternoons we'll be welcoming you in at a safe distance at predetermined pickup times for you to pick up your produce. And each week it's going to be different types of produce depending on what's being harvested and a different price each week. So feel free to check us out, and that's all on the website if you're interested in learning more. So for today, let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about cucurbits. So cucurbits are anything in the family of cucurbits. Includes cucumbers, squash, so summer squash, winter squash, acorn squash. This is our farm dog Boyd. He wants a little camera time. So there's summer squash, winter squash, acorn squash, cucumbers, there's pumpkin, and what else? Melons. So watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew. Those all fall in this category of cucurbits. And cucurbits characteristics include usually they're pretty prickly, the plant at least, tend to be a little bit prickly to the touch, which can be beneficial for keeping like little critters like bunnies away. They tend to have all similar looking seeds inside, so if you think of the types of seeds that you see when you carve a pumpkin or when you cut open a cucumber, they kind of have those tan, flattish, like teardrop shaped seeds. Obviously sometimes that varies with watermelon and things like that, but that's another characteristic. And they also mostly tend to have the same looking flowers, so yellow or orange or white flowers before the fruit appears on the vine or on the plant. So cucurbits are the big family that we're talking about today, but we're going to kind of zoom in on cucumbers and squash. So those are two big vegetables that we see a lot in New England gardens. You'll be seeing it in the learning garden, and if you participated in the seedling sale at Newton Community Farm, there were a lot of squash and cucumbers that we sent home with folks. So hopefully this will be useful in terms of getting yourself started with those crops. So before we show that, I want to introduce you to the cameraman, Jay. He might be asking me a few questions, so I just want everybody to know where the voice is coming from if he does. So let's take a look at what we have in the learning garden. I have a number of things growing. Some are doing well, some are not doing as well, which is great for teaching purposes. So right here, and pardon the weeds, it hasn't received too much weeding. So alongside these peas here, you'll see zucchini. So if you want to come down and take a look, this is a zucchini plant. When I put this in the ground, I transplanted it, which means that it was a small seedling that had been grown in the greenhouse here. And I took the seedling and I planted it in the bed, and that's what we call transplanting. And most cucurbits, especially cucumbers and squash, prefer to be transplanted. The alternative is direct seeding, which is when we take the seed and put it right in the soil. Some crops enjoy that more and respond better to that method of planting, and others do not, and they like to be grown in a toasty greenhouse in a more controlled environment. So squash and cucumber and zucchini fall under that category. They like to be direct seeded. So I direct seeded these, I would say 3 weeks ago. So this bed here is zucchini, like I said, and they're not growing rapidly, which is okay. They're still growing, and you know, it's a super warm, sunny June day, and this is the kind of weather that they like. They like heat and they like sunshine. So if you want to zoom in a little bit closer, I can kind of show you what's happening in the earlier stages of this plant. I'll try not to cast my shadow on the plant. So these healthy leaves are nice and green. They're attracting sunlight and they're gathering nutrients for the plant. You can kind of see some buds starting to form. So all around the center of the plant. And if you could touch it, it's a little bit prickly. Right now it's kind of just fuzzy. And if you take a look at these outside leaves, they're pretty holy. So that signals to me that there have been some pests on these plants. The damage isn't terrible. I'm not super worried about this leaf, but if you look on the other side, this leaf is pretty mangled. And it looks like it was a pest. So rather than something that would spread like bacteria, it looks like it was probably just a bug. So I might leave that for now, but you can always just kind of clip off those diseased leaves or those leaves that don't look so good to protect the healthier leaves in the middle. So this is our zucchini bed. Let's take a look down here at what else we have.
So can you talk about the pests that typically attract the zucchini plants?
Yes. So to zucchini plants in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So with zucchini plants, you see the main problem is powdery mildew. And that is something that happens in the soil. So that's a bacterial infection from the soil, typically associated with overwatering your zucchini plant. And you can it's important to monitor the plant and see it as it develops. And again, you can prune off the leaves that are infected. If one leaf is showing, pretty dire signs of bacterial wilt, not bacterial wilt. If one leaf is showing pretty dire signs of the
powdery mildew.
Start over. If one leaf is showing particularly bad signs of powdery mildew, you can always just kind of clip that one off and protect the other leaves. And that also protects the other plants in your garden because it can spread. So that's a particular concern, the powdery mildew with zucchini. With cucumbers, they kind of have their own. They can get powdery mildew, but cucumbers tend to have their own issues with bugs. And I'll be able to show you that with my cucumbers down here in a little bit. So right here, we have squash. So this is summer squash. And you can see this is another example of a plant that's kind of getting eaten significantly by bugs. You can see these leaves are pretty chewed up. They don't look like they won't survive, but these were also transplanted maybe a week after those. So these have been transplanted in the ground for about 2 weeks. And you can see, so the reason why I'm not pulling these yet is because it looks to me like this is bug damage. I don't see really many signs of powdery mildew or bacterial wilt, which is another disease that you can get on these crops. If you look in the center of this plant, you can start to see these buds coming in. And these are going to turn into flowers hopefully soon. So ideally when this plant gets a little bit bigger, which I'm hopeful that it will, it'll be able to kind of put out some stronger, newer leaves, and as it gains size, it will be less affected by bugs that are eating it right now. But we'll see. Everything is kind of just take a look at your garden in the morning, see what's going on, and if they continue to look worse, I'll probably pull them out and just plant something different here.
So what's some of the techniques for pest control?
Yeah, so for pest control, one thing that you can do, if you want to come over this side, if you see right here, pests like kale. It's pretty prone to disease and bugs and things like that. So what you see covering this bed of kale is, it's called Protect Net, or another word for it is Rime, or something that you kind of shelter the plants with so that the bugs can't get in. So if you can see, the edges are all buried in dirt, and it creates this kind of ecosystem where bugs can't really get in, and everything underneath is quite a bit happier. So we use this a lot on the farm. If you look out in the field here, you'll see our farmer Greg and our farm manager Bee. And you'll also see a number of beds that have this kind of protective net over the top of the crops. And here we use it on crops that are really pest prone, like kale and chard when it's young and small, and radishes. Anything in the brassica family particularly is what we'll put our netting on. But if you have access to or are interested in using this kind of protective gear in your garden, it would work totally fine for squash or cucumbers or zucchini. And they would probably respond pretty well to it, because as you saw with my squash over there, it's pretty bug bitten. So we're now over near the squash that I'm pretty excited about. So this squash has been here for probably a little bit closer to a month. So again, it was also transplanted, and it's gained a lot more size. So it has these really healthy leaves. So this is summer squash, and you can see kind of under the canopy, I'm not sure how close in you can get, but you can actually see the spikes, the little prickles, which tend to irritate my skin a little bit. So when you are harvesting, it's a good idea to maybe wear gloves or just be aware that it's probably going to be prickly. So if you look down here, you can actually see some squash forming. So this variety is Zephyr. It's called Zephyr, and it actually is kind of known for its trademark green and yellow. It's usually half and half. And I know folks at the farmers market sometimes ask Greg if it's not completely ripe yet, and it actually is. That's just the variety that we like to grow here, and this is my first time growing it, and it is clearly taking pretty well. They look pretty happy, I think. Yeah. So this is kind of a good time to talk about squash blossoms. If you want to come down a little bit closer to the plants, let's go right in the middle here. So as your squash and your cucumber grow, so this is squash, but you'll see blooms like this on all of your squash and cucumber plants. You'll kind of see them starting to unfurl, like they'll start out as these little bulbs. You can see that one. And then they'll get a little bit bigger, but they'll stay closed like this one. So many examples down here. And then they'll start to unfurl, and they'll eventually look like these kind of big, pretty floppy flowers. This plant's probably a little bit dry. And then from these flowers, you'll start to see your fruit forming. And if you can see at the bottom of this fruit, so there's a little bug. I don't know what bug this is, but I'm probably gonna knock him down. So you can see that this squash has formed from behind this flower, and actually these flowers are edible. So you could pick it right off, since it's done its job and it's left us with this fruit. You can pick it right off, and this is actually edible. So I know one recipe is you can stuff it with ricotta cheese and cook it up like that, and they're just these kind of sweet little treats that are like a bonus on a plant that you're going to get a big harvest from later on with your squash. So squash blossoms, and as you can see, there's kind of a number of them, but I'll wait to pick any of mine just to be safe until there's a little bit of fruit showing behind the blossom, and I know that it's done the job that it's intended for. So we can step a little bit down this row, and then we have a couple of cucumbers. So we've talked a little bit about squash, we've talked a little bit about zucchini, and we'll talk a little bit about cucumbers. I'm not having as much luck with cucumbers this year, but these are okay so far. So they're obviously much smaller. Believe it or not, these cucumbers were planted at the same time as these squash. So they have not grown as abundantly. And you probably can't tell on camera, but right now there are like a number of bugs kind of flying away from the cucumbers. These are really pest prone, and they attract a good number of bugs. So as you can see, the leaves are pretty green, but some of them are pretty not looking very good. So I'll pick off this leaf because I would do it anyways. So let's look at that. Definitely doesn't look healthy, right?
Nope.
So my two guesses, and we'll see if Jay can speculate as well, I would guess either bacterial wilt or powdery mildew. What do you think?
I think it's more bacterial wilt.
Bacterial wilt.
Yeah, powder mildew is more white.
So with this kind of, so what I've been seeing mostly on these plants is cucumber beetles, and you might see those in your garden too. They're teeny little beetles. They're usually like black and yellow, and they are attracted to cucumbers. They bore holes in the leaves. So here's another example. I might not pick this leaf off, but you can see it has a hole in it. And these kind of holes leave the plant susceptible to bacterial infections like bacterial wilt. So the beetles themselves aren't so much of an issue as the damage that they leave behind. So I'm definitely going to pick this out, and I may not even throw it in my garden. I may throw it away inside just so that the disease doesn't spread anywhere else. But it's a good idea if you see a leaf that has this kind of damage to just kind of prune it off and clean up the plant if you can. And really, I was kind of making fun of these plants before, but they don't look so bad. They're taking a while to grow. I'm seeing another kind of ugly leaf under here. So that's another example of that kind of bacterial infection there. So anything that looks like this, you can take them off. The plant will survive without them, and hopefully you can catch the damage early enough that it won't spread to too much of the plant. If I saw my cucumber plant entirely looking like this, I'd pull the whole thing out and just cut my losses. So these are my examples in the learning garden of cucumbers so far. On the farm side, right outside of the learning garden here, they've planted cucumbers quite a bit earlier than I did. So we can go take a look at those, and they have a little bit of a different look to them. Taking a little walk around the teepee here. Planted some scarlet runner beans, which will hopefully kind of vine up, but we'll see. Boyd's back in the picture. So right here, we have a big row of cucumbers. And as you can see, they have a similar shape to the cucumbers that I have in the garden back there. They're the same variety. These cucumbers are planted, as you can see, on black plastic. We talked a little bit about this in last week's episode. Black plastic is great for heating up the soil and keeping plants that like heat nice and happy. So these cucumbers are obviously pretty happy. They're vibrant green, they're looking pretty good. They do have a few spots on their leaves, but again, that's really not that big of an issue because for the most part, they look happy and healthy. So I was asking Farmer Greg about what this trellis is for, because I know that folks can trellis their cucumbers as a way to save space. So that's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, is that cucumbers, squash, and zucchini all really like space. So you'll plant your plant and they'll just vine way out, especially if they're healthy. They just like to take up a lot of space. And that can be great on a farm, but in a home garden or in a raised bed, that can be difficult. So trellising is an option. These actually won't be trellised. So this is set up, I believe, for the crop that's coming in after the cucumbers, but these cucumbers are just going to sprawl out along the black plastic. From what I've heard, some people have luck with trellising their cucumbers. It saves space and it's good for airflow, which helps prevent those kind of bacterial diseases that we were talking about before. But here, sometimes because they're handled so much, the plant, when they're trellised and clipped up, the plant can respond by kind of dying off. They can be pretty sensitive to sun, so if they're flipped around a lot and exposed to different angles of sun, they may not be as happy. And that's not to say that trellising doesn't work. You might try it out and it might work awesome for you, but there's kind of pros and cons in different schools of thought with whether or not trellising is a great idea for cucumbers. So kind of zooming in down here, as you can see on the kind of same vein of trellising, cucumbers and other cucurbits will send out these little tendrils. And these are what will, if you're aiming to have them trellised, they'll kind of reach up and clip onto a support system like this. So if you are trellising your cucumbers or your squash, it should be something that can hold significant weight. So this would probably be sufficient. I mean, this is like a plastic that will hold, and it's zip tied into these wooden posts. So this is sturdy. So we want to make sure that whatever we're setting up for a trellis can hold some weight of our fruit once our plants start producing. Speaking of which, you take a peek under here, you can see some of the first cucumbers of the season coming in. Now what I would like to do, if I were harvesting this, which I won't right now, I tend not to try to pull cucumbers or squash or zucchini right off the vine. Sometimes you can pull and it'll come right off clean. Other times it can kind of yank other buds off. It can even damage the root if you pull it too hard, even if you twist it. So I tend to recommend either using a harvesting knife to just kind of slice through the stem, or using clippers to have a nice clean cut and not tugging on your plant or moving your plant around too much. And another bit with harvesting is when you do harvest anything in this family, it's a good idea, especially if you're not going to eat the cucumbers or the squash right away, to just leave a little bit of stem on top. It can prevent some rot that you might otherwise see on the top of your cucumber. So this is Farm Up's early bed of cucumbers, and that's what we're looking at. So let's walk back through the learning garden. Jay, do you have any more questions that you would bring up now?
Could you harvest your cucumbers throughout the season, or is it you have to harvest it one bit at a time?
Yeah, so cucumbers like to be harvested early and often, so they tend to have the best flavor, and this is true for squash and zucchini as well. They tend to have the best flavor when they're harvested almost a little on the premature side. So, waiting for zucchini, for example, to get to that like big baseball bat size, it actually probably won't have the best flavor. So it's best to harvest them when they're still kind of young and tender, and they tend to have the best flavor then. And with cucumbers, depending on the variety, that will dictate when you'll harvest. So for pickling cucumbers, you can harvest those when they're real small. And for the bigger cucumbers that you might use in a salad or to eat fresh, you can harvest them when they're a little bit bigger, like 6 or 7 or 8 inches. And yeah,
Great.
early and often and continuously throughout the season. So if you're having your lunch and you're making a salad, it's a good idea to go out and grab whatever you can from the plant to have. And that's about it for squash and cucumbers and cucurbits as a whole. I'm going to find something to do with this squash flower. And thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.